Hello, Naomi Stockman from My Local Hypnosis, and today I'm talking about anxiety and how it affects our kids. Now, my little boy turns 4 this week, and I have a little bit of experience raising children and, how my stuff has affected my children. My oldest is 31, and then my next one's 28, and the next one is just doing a HSC, so she's 17, and then little Ollie is 4. So I've got what you'd say 3 generations of experience of parenting, and I've also been able to see how things have changed. I know with my eldest 2 children, there was no such talk of children having anxiety or even anxiety being such a big problem in our society. And now it's children as young as 5 being prescribed anti-anxiety medication. So it really is a big problem. And it's not just a problem for us, it's a generational problem. A lot of clients who come to me will come to me either saying, my children are also anxious, I have anxiety, my mother has anxiety, and they might even identify, like, I'm pretty sure, although it wasn't diagnosed, that, even my grandparents may have had anxiety. So it is running in families. Now, that does not mean that it's a genetic thing. You're not, somebody isn't destined to be anxious. Everybody can maintain calm. Some of us have a different nature or personality, and some of us have been through different things, but we can all achieve calm. Nobody is destined to be anxious for any genetic reason. There's a thing called epigenetics. There's things called generational trauma. Epigenetics relates to how our genes and our DNA respond to the environment and to what we're exposed to. And part of that is what we're going to be talking about today, because part of that is how our parenting and how we regulate our emotions and how our anxiety can be passed on to our children, affect our children in different ways, either making them also hypervigilant and upregulated in their nervous system, or making them feel that they're responsible for regulating everybody else, so they become like over empathetic. So that's when you see people, they're like, I'm an empath, and they're scanning the room looking for anyone who's dysregulated emotionally. That's from having been raised by somebody who may have either had anxiety or not been able to regulate their own emotions. So the child's been then learned through their nervous system to pick up when the cues, the nonverbal, invisible cues for when somebody else is not emotionally stable. So the truth is that as parents, we are always teaching. Children are always learning. We have been told over and over again how children are so resilient, how they'll just get through, and it's amazing how they can survive. Well, it is true. We are resilient and we will survive. However, we are not resilient in the way that we're told. Children are actually that they're being formed, they're being built, their nervous system is learning. So anything that they're going through is going to affect how they respond as adults, and it's going to affect their levels of anxiety. Basically, anxiety is the sense that I'm not safe. And when we're not safe, we have a fight, flight, freeze, which you all will have heard about if you're watching this channel or watching. If you're watching it live on Facebook, you will know what I'm talking about, our emotional triggers, and that helps us to know when to respond in certain ways. Now, often with anxiety, there's nothing going on. Our head is calm, or there's nothing really going on there. It's our body that's having a physical anxiety response, the heart, the breath, the upregulation, the jitteriness, that feeling that you're not coping or overwhelmed, and it's really, really uncomfortable. So how does our anxiety affect our children? Well, if our parent is giving off nonverbal cues that they are not safe, and this can come in many different ways, and they can even be like real cues, like the way we communicate with our children. If our nervous system is acting as though something's not safe, our children pick that up with their nervous system. So co-regulating with our children means that not only are we able to give them the message that everything's safe and I'm calm, and so therefore you can calm down, and I'm here, I'm your pillar of safety, your strength and your protector, it also means that children will pick up the sense that, gee, mum's terrified, gee, mum's not not comfortable here, mum's not giving off chill vibes. And so if mum's not giving off I'm safe vibes, then how can the child feel that their nervous system can relax if mum is not relaxed? That's how it works. If you think about people who you know that have dogs, have you ever noticed that you'll see an anxious person that's highly strung will have that anxious, highly strung dog? And that's because dogs will co-regulate to their owners. And so I once heard a dog trainer say, if you find somebody who can train a dog well, that they'll be able to raise a child well. And the reason for that is obviously that when you're calm and you're consistent and you're able to regulate with your dog, that you'd also be able to do that with a child. Now, I haven't fact checked how true that is, but it sounded reasonable and logical to me. So I remember when Ollie was little, he would crawl to the edge of the bed and just launch himself off. I would shriek and gasp and grab him, and on one instant he fell, and since then he learned to be scared of heights and not fly off the side of things. Babies will also reach for spiders. It's only our response to the spider and to them touching it that gives them the cue that it's something to be scared of. So you can see how this will flow through if mum or dad is highly strung, anxious, but there's other behaviors that we display and exhibit when we have anxiety and or depression, which passes on to our children. So our verbalizing, if we are worriers, we may be verbalizing, catastrophizing, terribilizing certain situations or events. So the words that come out of our mouth that are going into our children's ears may be what we think we need to speak about or say. The problem with problems is that we feel like we need to talk about them. The problem with fears is we feel like we need to focus on them. If somebody has a fear, they'll focus on the fear, and it kind of blocks out everything else. In fact, our physical vision narrows when we're in fear. So we go into foveal view, which is like a tunnel view, and we lose all this peripheral vision, which means that our focus is on the threat, and that's in order to protect ourselves. Now, all of this is conceptual stuff, because obviously if mum's anxious, it's a school morning, we're getting ready for school, like there's no threat that she's focusing on. However, it's about the nervous system, it's about the language, it's about how we're responding and reacting, and how that's then being passed through to our children through their neuroception, which is our nervous system's ability to pick up when we need to be on edge. That walking on eggshells feeling that you might have, even though nothing's really happening. And you might walk into a room and you might feel relaxed and comfortable, or you might walk into a room and you might feel on edge, and there might not be anything different in those two rooms, but your nervous system is picking up different cues which you may not be consciously aware of, but our unconscious runs our life, not our conscious mind, as I am frequently saying on my live. So, okay, so an example from my life of the catastrophizing or terribilizing is, so I remember my mum telling me a story about something really awful that happened to a little girl, and this story still, even her words, where we were standing, everything is still with me today. It's an actual trauma, because you don't remember non-traumatic things. Like, I don't remember other conversations I had with my mum, but this one I do remember, and it's a really quite an awful story. When we tell our children terrible stories, we think that we're allowing them to understand the world better and be able to be better equipped and prepared for avoiding that thing happening to them. But in actual fact, that's not what happens. I wasn't or am not better equipped to handle that situation. What it does is it escalates or raises our own level of distress, and then shuts down things like cognitive processing, which you need. You need your logical mind to be there. When we're in distress, we're not thinking clearly, and we're not able to problem solve. So we're actually more at risk of experiencing something awful in one sense if we have heard lots of stories about this terrible thing. So Okay, so it's important for us. What can we do about all this stuff as parents? So, say for example, you're watching this and you're thinking, "Yeah, but I'm an anxious person. I sometimes worry. And what if it's going on to my children? And what if my nervous system is giving them cues and making them anxious?" The first thing to do is to be proactive and to take notice of when your nervous system is not calm and when your mental and emotional health is not good, and be able to identify when it's you're responding or reacting or coming from your stuff, like whatever's going on for you, so not from the present moment. And that can be, and that the triggers that happen, when our kids trigger us, for example, our triggers are their signals that we've got unresolved trauma in certain areas. Because if you had resolved those things, they wouldn't be triggering you. This happens in all relationships. It definitely happens in parent-child relationships. Our kids can trigger us. They will trigger us. It's almost like they're programmed to trigger us. And what that then does is we may respond badly in a situation. We may, overcompensate. There's a whole stack of behaviors that we might do. We might feel guilty for things, when that parent guilt, that mum guilt that comes up in us. And any parenting that is done from a place of guilt or fear is not going to be positive parenting. You're not going to be creating positive outcomes from that. And that's any decision you make in fear or out of guilt is never going to lead to good things. So how to know if you are parenting from a place of fear and guilt. So first one, so say, for example, someone comes to me and they say, "Look, I'm really worried about my child. I don't want them to be bullied at school. I don't want them to be bullied at school." There's a physical fear, "Oh my gosh, what if my child's bullied at school?" Now that typically comes from people who themselves experienced bullying at school. And they might say things like, I don't want my child to feel like they're alone. And often then that will be coming from somebody who felt alone as a child or feels alone now. And then there's, I don't want my child to feel that they don't belong, that they're different, that they don't fit in, or be rejected. That's a horrible thought, for our child to feel rejected, to feel alone, to be bullied. All these things feel really horrible to imagine. And in order for you to not want them, you have to be imagining them. I don't want my child to struggle, the world to struggle, life to struggle, all that stuff. When we come from that place in parenting, like the I don't want my child to feel, it means that we've gone there in our mind. We've felt what it would feel like if that happened to our child, and we are terrified. Now that means if we're coming from an I don't want my child to feel this awful, terrible thing, that's a clear indicator, and 100% that there's unresolved stuff in us. If we're parenting from this unresolved stuff, we are just going to continue the loop. That's what happens with emotions. If they're not resolved, they continue, they repeat, they loop. This is our stuff. It's not our children's stuff. When I can know that someone's in a parenting from a healthy space, they come and they say, "I want my child to be happy. I want my child to be confident. I want my child to have good friendships. I want my child to feel accepted, like they're worthy and good enough. And I want my child to have fun and have a happy childhood." That's a completely different feeling from I don't want my child to have these horrible things. And you can see the anxiety there. And what happens with us is that we attract what we fear. And the other part of that is that our own self-esteem plays a huge part in how we show up as a parent. If I feel like I'm not good enough, if I feel like I'm not a good enough mum, if I feel like I've failed, I'm a failure, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, or that kind of thing, then nothing I do I'm going to feel that is good enough. And that includes my parenting. So I'm going to go straight in to parenting from guilt, and parenting as like I'm a failure, parenting as like I've got something to compensate for in my parenting. And that message to the child is, there's something not right, there's something wrong, mum's guilty because of something there's some shortfall there. Feeling bad because we fail to always have the right answer or the right response. Sometimes we do be crap parents. I've been a mum that I I'm not proud of, or that I think to myself, oh, gee, that wasn't really a good response. And that when we come from that place where we're beating ourselves up for the way we parent or what we haven't done or for whatever our child's had to go through, then that causes us to parent in a way that gives a message to our child that is not positive and can cause them to feel that we're not confident. Confidence breeds confidence, being confident in us. So basically, the crux of the message, if you just take one thing from this video, is do the work on yourself, because whatever you haven't dealt with within you is going to come up in your parenting, and whatever you bring to the table in your parenting, no matter whether you want it or you don't want it, you are going to bring this stuff with you when you're parenting, and it's going to be going into the home, into the family, into the experience that your children have. So I know for me, when I felt bad about working too much, I would then overcompensate with my leniency on my children, or my spending on my children, buying them things, or, and it goes back to those love languages. A child whose love language is gifts might thrive in that environment. But if my love language is, quality time, then that's not going to work at all. So it's about working with what's going to work for the children. There's another part of this, which is when there's something about our children that we are worried about or can't accept or reject, or it could be a behavior, it could be a diagnosis. Perhaps we've got a child who has some behavioral stuff, some learning stuff, and then it's kind of like it's all on me. I need, as the mum or as the dad, to be there for my child and to love my child, and of course we do love our children to the point where it actually can hurt us so much to witness their struggles. So for me personally, it was always tough if a teacher or a doctor or anyone said anything about my child, your son or daughter's this, or we're worried about this or worried about that. I straight away would take that on me. I was not well behaved at school. So I had past trauma from being in trouble at school. What if my kids are in trouble at school? What if this happens? What if that happens? I don't want my kids to be in trouble at school. So I was parenting from my own place of trauma in relation to that. That then went on to my children. I can 100% say that whatever I had not solved, especially with or resolved or healed or worked on in my life, went on to my eldest children. What kids need to know is my parents are okay. They are solid. They are rock solid. I can't crack them. Nothing can crack my parents. They can protect me, because if a parent can't cope with day-to-day life and can't cope with kids and can't cope with this, then how are they going to cope how are they going to be able to protect me as the child? If the parent believes that the world is not a safe place, how can the child believe the world's a safe place? If the parent doesn't believe that people are good, how can the child believe that people are good? If the parent doesn't believe that the future's good or see good outcomes and is worried all the time, how can the child believe the future is good and see? We can say all we like to our children. We can say, oh, honey, I believe in you. I'm proud of you. You can do anything. I know you're going to be great. But if the rest of our behavior and language and attitude and experience is in complete contrast to that, that's then going to confuse the child. The child's not going to feel safe. Anxiety is all about feeling safe. We need to feel safe. If we don't feel safe, if the world's not a safe place, if people aren't good here, then how can I be safe? And I'll share a few stories in a moment. It's really important what stories you tell your children about yourself, about your experiences. I've seen it so often where the family has fears. So I'm thinking of a particular family with a few children in their teen years, and there was the daughters, and they were very, very anxious and depressed, and they were leaning on each other, and the family was such a supportive, and the mum was absolutely beautiful. She was just lovely. She would do anything. She was such an aware, bubbly, vibrant woman. And she was so worried about her daughters who had this anxiety, this depression, and they weren't going to school anymore. They were really struggling with everything. And I spoke to the girls, and I asked them individually, separately, and I said, tell me about the world. And they said, oh, it's a very, tough place, and it's, it's sort of scary, and I said, tell me about the people in the world. And they said, oh, there are good people, but they're far and few between, and we have to stick together, and most people are out to whatever. And I said, tell me about like yourself in this world. Well, I'm I can't hack it here and whatever. And they both said pretty much the same thing, and it gave me kind of like a vision in my mind of these kids in this dark, scary swamp. If you can imagine like a swamp, and it's just dark and it's scary, and they're huddled together in this swamp. And I explained, I said to them, if the world was this scary swamp, and there's just, things out there to get you, where is mum in this swamp? And they said, oh, she's way out there. And it's almost like, even though the mum was bright and bubbly, and she was so supportive and lovely, and like I connected with her and thought, wow, what an amazing mum, and all this sort of stuff. The impression that the kids had was that the mum was out in this swamp too, and they were in the swamp, and the world was this swamp. And so it goes like that from generation to generation. And I did suggest to the mum, look, perhaps, because I know that children bring up in us, I said to her, look, I can sense your fear and your worry around these girls, these beautiful girls that you've got, and I can sense your helplessness. And she was really emotional. I said, has there ever been a time where you felt completely helpless to save anyone? Because she really was really worried about these children, about these girls, and it was a very raw emotional conversation we were having. And I said, have you ever felt this feeling where you just were terrified and you couldn't save someone? And she said yes, that she'd actually witnessed her losing a family member in a very traumatic way as a child, where she actually witnessed something really traumatic. And that really brought it home for me when I'm looking at these families where you've got parents and you've got children. Our children learn how to feel in the world from us. They learn, is this a safe place? Am I safe? And what are the other people here like from us? And if we have these fears, these anxiety, and we take these, even though we may not operate in an anxious way outwardly, we pass this on in some way to our children, and they are constantly absorbing from us the energy, even on an energetic level. And if you believe in energy, not only that we are made of energy, but that around us, a meter around us is a field of energy, and they've measured that field of energy, and it changes depending if you're in a joyous mode, if you're a fearful mode. That is a measurable frequency that changes. And so when we suffer anxiety, when we suffer depression, no matter how much we love our children, no matter how much we might want to protect them or shield them from what we're actually going through, first of all, it's all the obvious things like, if I'm a worried person, I'm going to speak worried words, but then it's also our frequency and how we respond and react to the things that they bring up in us and for us. Just loving another human being as the way we do love our children if we've got anxiety in ourselves, that's going to be a very big possibility and probability that we are also then going to pass that on to our children in some way. The last thing I want to talk about is when our children witness our anxiety and our depression, and how, say, for example, if they have two parents, one parent might be anxious and the other parent takes on the role of the the strong, I hold it together, everything's on my shoulders kind of parent, that there's that dynamic, that enabling dynamic, that, one vulnerable parent with one stronger parent, where there's that dynamic that can also cause us to repeat that relationship pattern when we grow up. Which role are we going to take? Are we going to be this one or that one? And it's about identity as well. So all mental health stuff, all anxiety, depression, it boils down to our identity. Who am I? Who am I? What is this family I belong to? What is this extended world I belong to? What is the level of safety I can experience? Is it good to try new things? Am I safe to try new things? Is my world safe? If you have resonated, or I've touched a nerve or hit a trigger, or said something that you can connect with, leave me a comment. I'd love to get into a conversation around this. I obviously can only cover a small segment of things in each video, and if there's something else that, this is not the complete exhaustive list of what is affected on our children from anxiety and depression, but it does cover off some of the stuff. I know a lot of parents also talk about, how when they're shouting and they lose their temper because they're anxious and they're not coping with stuff, and that can cause even more guilt as well. So leave me a comment, give me a like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff, and I will see you next time. Have a great week.